David Reynolds had mastered the art of balance, a rare skill for anyone, let alone someone at the helm of one of the fastest growing tech companies in the country. As CEO of Moonlit, a cutting-edge firm specializing in cloud computing and cybersecurity, David's days were a whirlwind of meetings, strategic decisions, and fires to put out. Yet, despite the relentless pace, he remained a calm and measured presence, a steady hand guiding his company through the unpredictable currents of the tech world. His mornings began before sunrise. While the city slept, David would sit at his kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, reviewing overnight reports and emails from international partners. The glow of his laptop illuminated his thoughtful face, his eyes sharp but patient. Even in these quiet moments, the weight of responsibility was palpable. Moonlit wasn't just a business, it was the legacy of years of sacrifice, late nights coding in cramped apartments, and a vision to create technology that empowered people rather than exploited them. David's life outside of work was anchored by his family. His wife, Aisha, was a pediatrician, equally dedicated and compassionate, and their two young children filled their home with laughter and warmth. Weekends were sacred, reserved for family time, park visits, and Sunday dinners with extended relatives. It was in these moments, away from the boardrooms and investor calls, that David found the renewal he needed to face the relentless demands of his career. Despite his accomplishments, David carried himself with a humility that sometimes surprised those unfamiliar with his journey. Raised in a working-class neighborhood, he knew firsthand the challenges that came with limited resources and fewer opportunities. His success was never about status or extravagance, it was about breaking barriers and paving a smoother path for others who looked like him. Respect and fairness were not just words but guiding principles in every decision he made, whether in negotiating contracts or mentoring his team. On this particular day, David was on a routine business trip to San Francisco. The flight was uneventful on paper, a short hop to attend a critical product launch event and meet with potential investors. He arrived at the airport early, as usual, moving through security with practiced efficiency. First class had become a familiar space, a small comfort amid the chaos of travel. To David, it was a simple acknowledgement of his hard work, a space where he could prepare for the day ahead in peace. Boarding the plane, David nodded politely to the flight attendants and settled into his reserved seat near the window. The cabin was quiet, the soft hum of the engines already soothing as the plane prepared for takeoff. He pulled out his tablet, reviewing notes and emails, focused and ready. Moments later, a flight attendant approached him with a hesitant expression. "Excuse me, sir, but there seems to be a seating issue. We need you to move to business class." David looked up, surprised but composed. "I believe this is my assigned seat." The attendant's eyes flickered briefly, her tone becoming firmer. "There was an overbooking error. We need you to take a seat in business." David's calm began to waver, not from anger but from disbelief. "I've checked my ticket multiple times. This is my seat." The attendant glanced away briefly, exchanging a quick word with a colleague before returning. "Please, sir, it's the airline's policy. We need you to move." Passengers nearby had begun to notice the exchange. Some murmured quietly, others watched with polite curiosity. David felt the familiar eyes of strangers assessing the situation, eyes that weighed more than the matter of a seat. He stood up slowly, signaling his intent to cooperate but unwilling to give in without clarity. "Could you please confirm this with the supervisor?" The flight attendant nodded, stepping away to make a call. The moments stretched, tense and awkward. David's mind raced through possibilities, a genuine mistake, a miscommunication, or something less innocent. When the supervisor arrived, Her expression was apologetic but firm. There was a mix-up with the seating chart. We ask that you move to business class. David's voice remained steady. I have a first-class ticket and a reserved seat. I'm happy to provide any documentation necessary. The supervisor's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary before she gestured toward business class. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, sir, but the seat is needed. David felt the sting of humiliation creeping in, not just from the demotion but from the implication behind it. The subtle, unspoken message that his place here was negotiable, conditional. He looked around, catching the faint glances of other passengers. Some offered sympathetic smiles, others avoided eye contact altogether. The flight attendants resumed their duties, their expressions polite but distant. Reluctantly, David gathered his belongings and moved toward business class, his calm demeanor masking the churn of emotions beneath. The seat was smaller, less private, a reminder of how even success was often tempered by invisible boundaries. As he sat down, he reflected on the incident. It was more than a seating error, it was a flashpoint in a long history of moments where merit and dignity were questioned or overlooked. Yet, David's resolve remained intact. He reminded himself of who he was, not defined by a single moment but by the totality of his journey and the values he upheld. The plane lifted off, cutting through the clouds, and David gazed out the window, the city shrinking beneath him. Ahead lay the demands of the day, the challenges of leadership, and the promise of progress. Despite the setback, he felt a renewed determination. Respect was not freely given, and fairness often required fighting for. David Reynolds was no stranger to battles, and this was just another skirmish in a larger fight, not just for a seat on a plane, but for equality, recognition, and dignity in every arena he entered. David sat rigidly in his assigned seat, the hum of the airplane engines a low, constant drone beneath the murmurs of the passengers. He had been looking forward to this flight as a routine part of his business trip, an opportunity to rest and prepare for the meetings ahead. But now, the calm he had anticipated was unraveling fast. The flight attendant's approach was brisk, her expression unreadable as she stopped in front of him. "Sir, I'm sorry, but you need to vacate this seat." David blinked, confusion flooding through him. "Excuse me. This seat has been reassigned," she said firmly. "Please gather your belongings and move." He glanced down at his boarding pass. It clearly read 12A, the seat he had selected weeks ago when booking the flight. There must be a mistake. "This is my assigned seat." The attendant's jaw tightened. "I understand, sir, but company policy requires the seat to be available for a VIP passenger. I need you to move to another seat." David's initial shock gave way to a growing unease. This wasn't just about seating logistics, the tone suggested something more deliberate. He looked around discreetly. Other passengers had begun to notice the exchange, their eyes flickering between him and the attendant. Some wore looks of curiosity, others of indifference. A few exchanged whispered comments, their voices low but charged with speculation. David took a steadying breath. "With all due respect, I will not move. This seat is my assigned seat, and I have a right to it." The attendant's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm asking you again to comply. If you refuse, I will have to involve the captain." A flicker of tension rippled through the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, some leaning forward to observe, others pulling out their phones, sensing a potential incident unfolding. The murmurs grew louder, the atmosphere thickening with anticipation. David weighed his options quickly. He could acquiesce, move to an unfamiliar seat, and avoid further confrontation. But something in him resisted. The demand felt unjust. It was not about comfort or convenience, it was a question of principle, respect, and dignity. If he gave in now, what precedent would it set? He met the attendant's gaze evenly. "I'm standing my ground." The crew exchanged glances behind him, their professional composure slipping slightly as the situation escalated. The flight attendant stepped back, radioing the cockpit with a terse message. Moments later, the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a minor situation. We ask for your patience as we resolve it quickly." David felt eyes on him from every direction, some supportive, some judgmental. A woman seated nearby leaned over and whispered, "You're brave to stand up like that." He nodded silently, appreciating the gesture but focused on the task at hand. The standoff had become more than just a seat dispute, it was a confrontation with a broader issue: who had the right to claim space, to exercise authority, and to be treated fairly. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The crew attempted various strategies to coax David into compliance, offering other seats, upgrades, and apologies. Each offer was politely declined. David remained quiet but resolute, his demeanor calm yet unyielding. In the back of his mind, David knew this incident would not end with the flight. The reverberations would spread through company corridors, media channels, and his own personal and professional networks. This was the spark that would ignite a larger fight against injustice cloaked in corporate procedure. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers whispered among themselves, some recording the encounter discreetly. The line between bystander and participant blurred as the incident unfolded in real time. For many, it was a reminder of the power dynamics at play in everyday interactions, where authority was often wielded without question. David reflected on the years that had led him to this moment. His career had been marked by hard work and perseverance, navigating corporate hierarchies with integrity. He had learned to pick battles carefully, to choose his moments. But this felt like a battle worth fighting. As the flight attendant returned to her post, there was a subtle shift. The crew's earlier insistence had softened slightly, as if acknowledging David's quiet strength. The captain's voice came over again. "Thank you for your cooperation, everyone. We appreciate your understanding." David's resolve remained unbroken. Though the immediate crisis was contained, he knew the struggle had only begun. This incident was more than a disruption, it was a symbol of the challenges he faced daily in asserting his rightful place. When the plane finally took off, the atmosphere remained taut. The seat dispute had cast a shadow, a quiet ripple of defiance that would grow beyond these cabin walls. David settled back, preparing for the battles ahead, both public and private. This moment at 30,000 feet was the first chapter in a fight for respect, equality, and justice that he was no longer willing to avoid. The flight was no longer just a journey from one city to another. It was the beginning of a new reality, one where David would confront the injustices that had long been ignored, starting with this very seat. And he was ready. News of the incident spread rapidly across social media platforms and corporate communication channels, igniting a wave of discussion, speculation, and controversy. Within hours, hashtags related to the event were trending, fueling polarized opinions among the public and employees alike. Some praised David for his decisive actions and steadfast leadership, seeing him as a figure standing up to misconduct and asserting control during a tense situation. Others, however, questioned his judgment, suggesting that his approach was heavy-handed or misguided, particularly as details emerged that painted a more complex picture of the conflict. Inside the company, the reactions were equally divided. Certain factions rallied around David, viewing him as the rightful leader navigating a crisis, someone who upheld the company's values and protected its interests under pressure. These supporters emphasized the importance of maintaining order and discipline, especially in a high-stakes environment like the airline industry. Yet, not all shared this view. Some executives and employees expressed unease, doubting whether David's response was appropriate or effective. They worried that the incident and its handling might damage the company's reputation and customer trust. Among this group, concerns surfaced about whether the leadership's messaging and internal communication were adequately addressing the situation, or if they risked alienating key stakeholders. Complicating matters further, the airline initially chose not to publicly admit fault or acknowledge any wrongdoing. Official statements were cautious and measured, emphasizing that the company was investigating the situation while maintaining a stance of neutrality. This refusal to openly accept responsibility frustrated many observers and intensified public scrutiny. The perception of corporate stonewalling contributed to a growing narrative that the company was more interested in protecting its image than in addressing the root causes of the conflict. Within the cabin crew ranks, some members who were implicated in the incident appeared to double down on their actions, either defending their behavior or refusing to cooperate fully with the investigation. This internal resistance exacerbated tensions and complicated management's efforts to present a unified front. David's leadership was thrust into the spotlight, with his reputation hanging in the balance. His every move and statement were analyzed by the media, industry analysts, and employees alike. Stakeholders watched closely to see if he could navigate the crisis effectively, maintain morale, and steer the company through an increasingly turbulent period. For David, the challenge was multifaceted. He needed to manage internal divisions, address the growing public relations nightmare, and maintain operational stability, all while safeguarding his personal and professional standing. As the fallout unfolded, David recognized the delicate balance he had to strike. Overly aggressive responses risked alienating employees and customers, while appearing passive or evasive threatened to embolden critics and erode confidence. He began consulting closely with his executive team and public relations advisors, aiming to craft a strategy that would quell unrest without sacrificing transparency or accountability. The process involved difficult conversations about potential disciplinary actions, revisions to company policies, and enhanced training programs to prevent similar incidents in the future. Despite the pressures, David endeavored to demonstrate resilience and resolve. He held a series of meetings with department heads and frontline staff, listening to their concerns and reinforcing the company's commitment to safety, respect, and professionalism. Internally, he sought to rebuild trust and cohesion, emphasizing that the company's strength depended on unity and shared values. Yet, he was keenly aware that restoring confidence would require more than words. Tangible actions and measurable results were essential. Externally, David faced a shifting media landscape. News outlets sought expert opinions, customer testimonials, and insider perspectives, further amplifying the story's reach and complexity. Social media influencers and advocacy groups added their voices, some condemning the airline's handling of the incident, others defending it. The rapid circulation of videos, posts, and commentary meant that the narrative was no longer controlled solely by the company or traditional media but had become a decentralized conversation with unpredictable dynamics. Under these conditions, David's communication strategy evolved. He moved from cautious statements to more direct engagement, participating in interviews and public forums to address questions and clarify the company's position. Transparency became a key theme, as he acknowledged the seriousness of the situation without conceding unnecessary blame. This approach aimed to rebuild credibility and demonstrate accountability, signaling a willingness to learn and improve. Within the company, the incident also sparked broader discussions about culture and conduct. Employees debated the boundaries of professional behavior, the adequacy of existing training, and the mechanisms for reporting and resolving conflicts. Leadership encouraged open dialogue, recognizing that the crisis presented an opportunity to examine and strengthen the organization's values and practices. These conversations, though sometimes uncomfortable, were seen as necessary steps toward fostering a healthier, more inclusive workplace. However, resistance persisted in some quarters. Certain crew members who had supported or condoned the contentious behavior challenged the push for change, fearing that new policies might undermine their autonomy or traditions. This resistance highlighted deeper tensions between established norms and evolving expectations within the company and the industry at large. Amidst this turmoil, David grappled with the personal toll of the crisis. The pressure to perform and the scrutiny from all sides tested his endurance and resolve. Maintaining composure under such relentless observation was challenging, yet he understood that any sign of weakness could be exploited by opponents or fuel further uncertainty. The board of directors also closely monitored the situation. While some members expressed confidence in David's leadership, others questioned whether alternative approaches or personnel changes might better serve the company's interests. Discussions about long-term strategy and risk management intensified, underscoring the high stakes involved. In this environment of uncertainty and contestation, David's ability to unify the company and manage the external narrative became critical. The incident had laid bare vulnerabilities that demanded attention, but it also presented an inflection point, a chance to redefine leadership, reinforce corporate values, and set a new course for the future. As the days turned into weeks, the story continued to evolve. Investigations proceeded, internal reviews were conducted, and corrective measures were implemented. David remained at the helm, determined to steer the company through the storm. Yet, the ultimate impact on his reputation and the company's standing remained uncertain, shaped by how effectively he could respond to the complex and often unpredictable challenges unleashed by the incident. Throughout this period, the stakes grew ever higher. The fallout from the incident was no longer a contained event but a catalyst for broader change, revealing the fragile balance between authority, accountability, and public perception in today's interconnected world. David's leadership would be judged not only by the decisions he made in the immediate crisis but by his ability to navigate the shifting tides of corporate politics, media scrutiny, and internal dynamics that defined the aftermath. David stood at the head of the boardroom, the weight of the room's tension pressing in on him like a physical force. His eyes scanned the faces around the polished oak table, executives, PR officials, and legal advisors, all waiting for his next move. The recent incident involving the airline's crew had escalated far beyond an isolated event. It was now a flashpoint, spotlighting systemic discrimination and institutional failure within an industry that prided itself on customer service and inclusivity. For David, the stakes were personal and professional. As CEO of one of the airline's largest clients and a prominent figure in the business world, he was uniquely positioned to demand real change. The incident had exposed a fracture in the company's values, and he refused to let it slide under the rug. Without hesitation, David tapped the table to command attention. Effective immediately, I have terminated the entire crew responsible for the recent incident, he announced firmly. The room fell silent. The decision was bold, unexpected even. The airline's leadership hadn't anticipated such a public and decisive move from a client of David's stature. The crew members in question had been involved in actions that were not just errors in judgment but rooted in discriminatory attitudes that endangered passenger safety and dignity. David's announcement sent a clear message: discrimination would no longer be tolerated, and accountability was non-negotiable. This action reverberated quickly through the media landscape. News outlets picked up the story within hours, framing David's move as unprecedented in the airline industry. Headlines splashed across screens and print: major client demands accountability, entire crew fired over discrimination, CEO's bold stance sparks industry-wide debate on bias. From private grievance to public battle, the fight against discrimination intensifies. David's decisive step forced the airline's hand. Facing mounting public pressure, the company issued a formal statement acknowledging the incident and pledging to review and overhaul its training and operational policies. The airline promised to implement stronger anti-discrimination protocols, improved oversight mechanisms, and sensitivity training for all employees. But David knew that statements were not enough. Change required sustained pressure and vigilance. His role as a major client gave him leverage to insist on ongoing reforms. He arranged meetings with airline executives to discuss concrete steps, monitoring employee conduct, establishing anonymous reporting channels, and ensuring transparency in handling complaints. Behind the scenes, David worked closely with civil rights organizations and advocacy groups, using his influence to amplify calls for industry-wide standards against discrimination. The conversation expanded beyond a single airline to address broader systemic issues affecting minority travelers and employees across the sector. David's relationships with trusted allies were tested during this time. Some questioned whether his public confrontation with the airline was too confrontational, fearing it might jeopardize business partnerships. Others warned of potential backlash from powerful industry figures resistant to change. But David stood firm, committed to transforming a personal struggle into a catalyst for widespread reform. The public narrative evolved rapidly. Social media platforms buzzed with debates, personal stories, and calls for solidarity. Passengers shared their experiences of bias and mistreatment, creating a collective voice impossible to ignore. The incident had become emblematic of the challenges faced by marginalized communities in spaces traditionally seen as neutral or welcoming. Within the airline, employees and management grappled with the fallout. Some resisted the changes, clinging to entrenched attitudes or fearing disruption to established hierarchies. Others embraced the opportunity to build a more inclusive workplace. The conflict, once a personal humiliation for David, had transformed into a movement demanding accountability and justice. David's own resolve deepened. He balanced the demands of his corporate responsibilities with the emotional toll of confronting systemic injustice. Late nights were spent strategizing, coordinating with legal teams, and preparing public addresses. The pressure was immense, but so was the purpose. Media interviews became frequent. David used every platform to articulate the need for change, emphasizing that discrimination was not merely a social ill but a business liability that undermined trust and growth. His messages resonated widely, inspiring other corporate leaders to reassess their own practices and policies. As the airline embarked on its reform journey, David monitored progress closely. Quarterly reports detailed improvements in employee behavior, customer satisfaction, and incident response times. While setbacks occurred, the trajectory was clear: the industry could no longer ignore the deep-seated issues exposed by the incident. David's decisive action created ripple effects far beyond the airline. Other sectors, from hospitality to retail, began examining their own practices, prompted by the public discourse sparked by his stand. Coalitions formed, best practices were shared, and regulatory bodies initiated reviews of existing policies. The incident, once a moment of personal conflict and indignity, had grown into a defining moment in the fight against discrimination in service industries. David's leadership demonstrated that leveraging power responsibly could effect meaningful change. At the same time, David remained grounded. He recognized that firing a crew was a necessary first step but not an end in itself. Long-term transformation required cultural shifts, education, and continuous accountability. He committed to remaining engaged, using his influence to ensure that promises turned into tangible outcomes. The airline's leadership acknowledged this. Together, they worked to establish a new framework for employee conduct and customer relations, integrating feedback from diverse stakeholders. Training programs were redesigned to address implicit biases and promote empathy, while mechanisms for reporting and addressing complaints became more accessible and transparent. Through it all, David maintained open communication with the public, providing updates and responding to concerns. His transparency fostered trust, reinforcing that the fight against discrimination was ongoing and collective. The conflict that had threatened to derail his career and reputation had instead propelled David into a position of moral and professional strength. His choice to take control, rather than retreat, reshaped not only his own narrative but also set a precedent for others facing similar battles. The industry watched closely, realizing that the old ways of ignoring or minimizing discrimination were no longer sustainable. David's decisive actions sent a powerful message: accountability was the price of progress, and those who wielded power had a responsibility to use it for justice. In the months that followed, David continued to champion inclusivity and fairness, both within the airline and across the broader business community. His efforts contributed to a growing movement that challenged complacency and demanded equity. The personal struggle had become a collective fight, and David was at the forefront, an agent of change in a moment that had fundamentally shifted the landscape of service, safety, and respect. The battle was far from over, but the turning point had been reached. The conflict had moved from a personal grievance to a powerful catalyst for transformation, with David firmly in control of the narrative and the momentum for justice firmly in motion. While many praise David for standing up against injustice, others criticize him for the harshness of his response. The incident that thrust David into the public eye was no small matter. It was a confrontation that exposed deep-seated issues, and his uncompromising stance stirred strong reactions from every corner. Supporters admired his courage and willingness to challenge the status quo, seeing in him a leader unafraid to fight for what was right. Yet, detractors viewed his approach as unnecessarily aggressive, arguing that a more diplomatic path might have yielded better results with less collateral damage. The airline at the heart of the controversy was quick to respond. What began as defensive statements soon escalated into full-blown legal threats aimed at silencing David and his company. Their legal team sent stern letters demanding retractions and threatening lawsuits over alleged defamation and breach of contract. Behind the scenes, their PR division worked overtime to control the narrative, spinning stories designed to cast doubt on David's character and motives. The airline's efforts were calculated and relentless, leveraging their resources and influence to weather the storm while undermining David's credibility. David felt the pressure mounting not only externally but internally as well. The public scrutiny was intense. Every statement he made was dissected by journalists, analysts, and social media users. Headlines ranged from laudatory to scathing, and the polarized opinions created a whirlwind of conflicting messages that David struggled to navigate. The relentless spotlight magnified his every move, and the weight of expectations felt crushing. Friends and acquaintances who had once celebrated his ascent now approached with caution or distance, wary of being caught in the crossfire. Within his company, the atmosphere grew tense. Employees whispered in corners, concerned about job security and the company's future. Morale dipped noticeably, and some longtime team members questioned whether David's fight was worth the risks. The dip in stock value reflected this uncertainty, signaling investor anxiety over the escalating conflict. David's leadership was being tested on multiple fronts, forcing him to balance his conviction with the practical realities of managing a business under siege. Emotionally, David found himself at a crossroads. The same fire that had fueled his initial stand against injustice now flickered with doubt. There were moments of deep exhaustion when the cost of resistance seemed overwhelming. He questioned whether his determination to hold firm had blinded him to opportunities for compromise or collaboration. The isolation that often accompanies leadership grew heavier, and he wrestled with the loneliness of carrying a burden few could fully understand. Despite these challenges, David's inner circle remained a steadfast source of strength. Close friends, trusted advisors, and key team members rallied around him, offering encouragement and perspective when the world seemed intent on pulling him down. They reminded him of the principles that had driven him from the beginning and reinforced his belief in the necessity of his fight. These moments of solidarity rekindled his resolve and helped to steady his course amid the chaos. Private conversations with his confidants became vital. In these spaces, away from the public eye, David could express his fears and frustrations without judgment. His advisors provided strategic counsel, helping him weigh the risks and benefits of various responses to the ongoing crisis. Friends offered emotional support, grounding him in the knowledge that he was not alone. These relationships were lifelines, anchoring David through turbulent times. In reflecting on the backlash, David recognized the complexity of the situation. Change rarely came without resistance, and the stakes involved entrenched interests accustomed to operating without challenge. The harshness of some critiques, while painful, underscored how deeply his actions had disrupted the status quo. Yet, he also saw that the fervent support around him was a testament to the importance of his stand. It was a reminder that leadership required not just courage but endurance. David's journey through this period was marked by both external battles and internal reckoning. The confrontation had exposed vulnerabilities both in the system he challenged and in himself. He confronted questions about his capacity to lead under pressure, about the sacrifices demanded by his principles, and about the kind of leader he wanted to be moving forward. These reflections shaped a new understanding of the costs and rewards of leadership in a complex and often unforgiving world. The public discourse surrounding David's actions continued to evolve. As time passed, some critics softened their stance, recognizing the legitimacy of the issues he had raised. Others remained steadfast in opposition, unwilling to accept any justification for his methods. The polarized reactions fueled ongoing debate, drawing attention to the broader systemic problems at play. David found himself at the center of a conversation much larger than himself or his company, a conversation about ethics, power, and accountability. Throughout this period, David maintained a careful balance. He stayed true to his convictions while remaining open to dialogue and strategic adjustment. His approach demonstrated a nuanced understanding that leadership was not simply about confrontation but also about adaptation and resilience. He navigated the challenges with a blend of firmness and flexibility, learning to modulate his public posture without sacrificing his core message. Ultimately, the experience forged a deeper resilience in David. The backlash, though painful, served as a crucible in which his resolve was tempered and refined. He emerged with a clearer sense of purpose and a reinforced commitment to the values that had propelled him into the fray. While the path ahead remained uncertain and fraught with obstacles, David faced it with renewed determination, bolstered by the knowledge that he had stood for something meaningful even in the face of intense opposition. This chapter of his journey was a testament to the complexity of leadership in times of crisis. It revealed the interplay of public perception, legal maneuvering, emotional endurance, and the vital importance of trusted allies. Through it all, David's story highlighted the challenges and rewards of standing up for justice, demonstrating that such a path is never easy but often necessary. David sat alone in his office late into the evening, the city lights casting long shadows across his desk cluttered with reports and messages. The recent incident had shaken him deeply, not just because of its immediate fallout, but because it laid bare the pervasive racial prejudice and systemic injustice that lurked beneath the polished surface of corporate success. His mind raced with thoughts and emotions, a turbulent mix of anger, disappointment, and a steely resolve that refused to be quelled. He thought back to the moment when the controversy erupted. A simple misunderstanding, or rather, a preconceived notion, had spiraled into a public scandal, one that threatened not only his reputation but the very foundation of his company. The backlash had been swift and severe. Clients pulled back, partners hesitated, and the media scrutiny intensified. Each headline felt like a personal attack, yet David understood the deeper currents beneath the noise. This was never just about one event, it was a reflection of a much larger struggle, one that he had been fighting quietly for years. Anger flared within him, hot and consuming. It was not just frustration with those who had jumped to conclusions or perpetuated stereotypes, but a broader rage at a system that continuously marginalized voices like his own. How many others had been dismissed or diminished because of the color of their skin or the biases held by decision-makers? How many talented individuals had their opportunities restricted not due to lack of skill, but because of prejudice entrenched in institutions? Yet alongside the anger was a deep disappointment. He had hoped that the progress made over the years would shield his company from such baseless attacks. He had worked tirelessly to foster an environment of inclusion and fairness, to lead by example in an industry often criticized for its homogeneity. But the incident reminded him how fragile that progress truly was, how easily it could be undone by ignorance and fear. David leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. He thought about the weight of responsibility that had always accompanied his role, not just as a CEO, but as a symbol of possibility for others who looked like him. The burden was heavy. He carried the hopes of his family, his community, and countless others who saw in his success a beacon of hope. It was a responsibility he did not take lightly, but the recent events had made that burden feel almost unbearable. In the quiet moments of reflection, David found clarity. He realized that his fight was not simply to clear his name or protect his company's bottom line. It was a fight for justice, for recognition, and for the dismantling of the barriers that still held back so many. The incident had crystallized his purpose, to use his platform not just to succeed, but to change the very structures that perpetuated inequality. This renewed sense of purpose was bolstered by the support of his family. His wife, ever steadfast, reminded him that the incident did not define him, nor did it negate the years of hard work and integrity behind his company's rise. Their children, bright and curious, were a constant source of inspiration, embodying the future he wanted to help build, one where opportunities were truly equal, and prejudice was not an obstacle. Mentors also played a crucial role during this time. Seasoned leaders who had faced similar struggles reached out with advice and encouragement. Their wisdom grounded David, helping him see the long arc of change beyond the immediate turmoil. They reminded him that setbacks were inevitable but could be overcome with resilience, strategic thinking, and a clear vision. With this support, David began to map out a path forward. He convened his leadership team, transparent about the challenges but unwavering in his determination. Together, they crafted a strategy that would not only address the immediate crisis but also strengthen the company's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Initiatives were planned to amplify underrepresented voices within the organization and to engage more actively with communities that had historically been marginalized. David also recognized the need to communicate openly with clients and partners. He initiated conversations to acknowledge the incident candidly, emphasizing the company's values and the steps being taken to ensure accountability and progress. While some reactions were cautious or critical, many responded with understanding and renewed support, appreciating the honesty and commitment to growth. Amid these efforts, David found moments to connect personally with employees, listening to their concerns and sharing his own reflections. These exchanges reinforced a culture of trust and solidarity, reminding everyone that they were not alone in facing the challenges ahead. It became clear that the company's strength lay not only in its business acumen but in its shared values and collective resilience. Throughout this period, David continued to wrestle with his emotions. The anger and disappointment did not disappear overnight, nor did the weight of responsibility lessen. But they were tempered by hope and determination, a belief that change was possible and that his leadership could be a catalyst for it. He also made time for self-care, understanding that sustaining this fight required mental and emotional fortitude. Quiet walks, moments of meditation, and time with loved ones became essential rituals, helping him maintain balance amid the storm. As weeks passed, the company slowly began to regain its footing. New partnerships were forged, grounded in mutual respect and a shared vision for inclusive innovation. The internal culture evolved, embracing diversity not just as a buzzword but as a core strength that fueled creativity and growth. David's journey through this deeper struggle had revealed the complex interplay between public perception and private resolve. It underscored the ongoing battle faced by leaders who must navigate external pressures while confronting their own vulnerabilities. But most importantly, it reinforced the power of purpose, the force that drives individuals to rise above adversity and to transform pain into progress. Through it all, David remained committed to leading with integrity and courage, knowing that the path ahead would be challenging but that the fight was worth every step. His vision extended beyond his own success to a future where systemic injustice was dismantled and where every individual, regardless of background, could claim their rightful place in the world.